Welcome Internet to a Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing notes on memory and desire that you have there. So it's a very short article, it's only like 4 pages long, and it's a fundamental article. And why is it fundamental? Because basically in this article, Bion is going to deconstruct everything we have come to know and love about psychoanalysis, but in a very, very fundamental and interesting way. So he's going to deconstruct 2 of the main objectives of psychoanalysis, mainly memory and desire. So here it's memory of the patient, about the patient, and desire of the therapist for the patient to heal. So he says that those things should be kept in check in a way. Because what he's going to explain in this article, and this is why it's so interesting, is that he says that those elements are misleading. They're misleading the psychoanalytic movement, and they're misleading our whole way of practicing with our patients. So why is that? Because when I'm saying it like that, it seems completely stupid. Because you have to have an objective, you have to have a goal for therapy, you have to have the memory of everything that has come through. So why is it that he's adamantly against both of those elements? Well, very simply, for him, memory is false, or at least it can be rebuilt, meaning that he calls it a sandy ground, that's something we're not sure about, and it can always be reinterpreted, reconstructed, analyzed in a different light, in a different way. So it's not a good guide within the matter of therapy, which is incredibly interesting and goes against everything you taught in psychoanalysis. And he's going to shift it around, saying this is not the way to do it, because of course these sensations, feelings, moments that have mattered for the patient, that's not what he's arguing. What he's arguing is that if you're trying to have a memory, a coherent memory of everything, a narrative that you're going to build that's going to make perfect sense, then you are at fault. You're at fault of building something that's an illusion, because you're not doing true psychoanalysis. You're not focusing on the very present instant of what is happening in psychoanalysis. You're building a fairy of the patient's mind. You're not doing anything but, in a way, defending yourself against the relationship with the patient by trying to understand. And he's very much against that idea that we should understand the patient, or even attempt to try and understand the patient, which is, again, incredibly bizarre when you think of it, because that's the whole point of psychoanalysis, is trying to understand oneself. But his arguments were very, very interesting, because he also states that desire of the therapist for the patient to grow better is also misleading, in the same way as memory is, but for different reasons. Because here it's the clinician that's going to put something into the psychoanalysis. It's not about the patient really, it's really about how the individual is trying to get somewhere. And he says that it's a bad measurement of progress. That progress should be measured through an evolution of moods, through the diverse range of topics of a session. And within a session, and even within psychoanalysis on the whole, that it becomes a bit dead, to use Ogden's words, or the deadness in the case of Ogden, that we are trying to go back again and again and again on a memory, a trauma, an event in the past, that in a way it becomes stale to try and do that. And our desires as therapists misguide us to try and find meaning, find something that's there when it's not. We're trying to reframe everything with a narrative, and that's what he's very much against. For him, evolution is made when you let go of all those things, of all those memories, desires that you have for the patient. So does it mean that you should remember nothing, and each time you see the patient it's as if you had seen him for the first time? Even though he says something like that, I don't think he meant really you don't know who they are. No, he's basically implying that you should always be open to see your patient in a new way, that you shouldn't fixate a patient in a box, or he's like that, thus he will always be like that kind of gist. You have to broaden it in order for the patient to really benefit from the therapy, that the therapist cannot have a rigid idea of who the patient is, that the therapist is also at a loss. And I think that's what is at the core of Bion's whole article, is that it is always important for the analyst to give a place, a space for the unknown and the unknowable. That our whole goal is to try and always be on the lookout for what is not known. Because for him, if you know something and you share it with a patient, it can be resistance, it can be a defense. But if the patient also knows it, then it's useless. And if it's the patient that knows it, well, that's like a classic Freudian resistance, right? So for him, the fact of knowing is in a way the enemy. And I find that very, very interesting, because at the very core of psychoanalysis, we've been brought up to try and get to that understanding and saying, no, this is a mistake. That fundamental way you were taught is a mistake, that you have to try and measure progress in a different way, try and adapt to the patient. And every patient is going to be very different, so different that a global theory is virtually pointless. And he points that out at the very end of the article, that a general theory is not good. What you have to do is basically follow something of a flow with the patient. It's the relationship. It's what is happening in the here and now, even though he doesn't use those words. But you have to not look into the past, but look at the present. It's the present, what is happening, that matters. Not what you want, and not the memory of the patient. In a way, he deconstructs the whole ideal of psychoanalysis in this very short article. Because how many times have I heard that what mattered was the understanding of the clinician that he then shares to the patient? And it can help. I'm not trashing it completely, but he's saying that there's something more to it. It's the being together, the being in the session, that is of paramount importance within psychoanalysis. It's not just I, therapist, have an understanding, I'm going to give it to you, or we're going to work on an understanding. The understanding is secondary to the unknown and the search for the unknown. Even though he does also explain in this article that it is going to create anxiety, massive anxiety, because renouncing our knowledge, renouncing what we think, renouncing our pre-established concepts, is going to throw us into a lot of anxiety. And when I mean us, I mean the therapists, right? Because the patient is not necessarily going to go through that much anxiety from it. But we are, because we are brought up to know, not to know. And that's the beauty of this article, is that it says, let's give a try to not knowing, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, and even if it's nigh impossible. Let's try. And that's what I liked about it. It's basically taking psychoanalysis and toppling it down and changing it completely. In a way, that's my associations, right? So there's not this in the text of Bion, but it reminds me of Fernburn a lot. Like, there is that main idea of psychoanalysis, and then there's a switch in the articles. And that's what makes it, I feel, thrilling to read, is that you see a new perspective on the whole discipline, a way of seeing it in a way that you never quite realized it could be done. And yet he's adamantly for a new way of trying to get to know the patient. So it was incredibly interesting. And because it's so short, I would really, really advise you to read it if you're interested in anything I've said about anything, because I think it's just such a good text. And even though it's not necessarily an easy read, the fact that it's so short is that you can reread it, you can think about it. I have underlined so many passages because I found them so interesting and so great. And I hope that in this video I've presented it in a okay-ish way, and I hope that it gave you some form of understanding. Even though I know he's against it, I think it's still interesting to talk about those theories and metapsychological constructs, because they're also what helps us to build it's very hard for me, see? I'm even struggling with it now, but I think that these articles make us think in a new way. They're expanding our horizon as therapists and as theoreticians. And that's what I like about this article. It has expanded it beyond what I felt was really my comfort zone. And that's great. wonderful, and that's something I completely and adamantly love. So I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.